and welcome to Our People, the podcast where we give space for Holdeman Stories. We focus on hope, healing, and inspiration. Connection, consciousness, and love are the driving motivations for this project. Remember to have grace for those who have chosen to speak out and share their experience. Please enjoy the story you will hear today.
Welcome to Our People's podcast. Today, I am Amanda, your host, and with me I have David Justus. So David, I'll just let you tell us a little bit about yourself.
Okay, I will try and do that. And I'll warn you right off the bat, I am an emotional person. And this story touches my heart clear to the core of my DNA. I am a 64 model, born and raised in Bonners Ferry, Idaho, the sixth of six children. Carol, Richard, Beth, Charles, Barbara, and myself. Dad and Mom were Minister Eddie Justus and his wife, my mom, Nettie Justus. Dad called our family as a joke. He called it family planning because it was girl, boy, girl, boy, girl, boy. And of course, it was a laugh point because we all know better. And for the most part, I kind of grew up by myself with most of 5 years between Barb and I, though we were quite close. I remember trying to walk to school with a pet baby deer that we acquired through swathing the hayfields. I don't remember if that little deer had a broken leg because of it or two broken legs because of it, but I definitely recall feeding that deer with a glass pop bottle and a nipple on it and feeding it cow's milk. And yeah, it was a very special little pet. And then Dad got a call from the neighbor, which we would have never made it to the school anyway, because it was about 8 or 9 miles away. And I was focused on walking in the ditch. And yes, it was a very big traffic hazard, a very big attraction. And people were stopping and taking pictures. And Dad ended up coming and getting us. And I can still remember that deer. I had to catch it for Dad. I had to hold it until Dad could get a hold of it. And he put it in the cab of the pickup. And its front hooves were up on the dash. And then away we went for home. And folks didn't know I was even missing, and I was over a mile and a half, probably close to 2 miles away from the house already when that phone call came in. Anyway, I met my future wife, Marjorie Seaman, when I was in 7th grade and she was in 6th grade. They moved to Bonners from Livingston, California, arriving on Thanksgiving Day, 1976. I suppose you could call it puppy love at first. I'm quite sure that's what it was. But we got married 9 years later in September of 1985. She was my best friend. There ain't no two ways about it. When I turned 18, Dad and I bought a 1980 baby blue Chevy Love 4x4 together. That's just the way it worked out, and we were both happy. Dad needed a pickup, and so did I. And I remember him feeling a little bit bad because he didn't think 18 was old enough to have a vehicle. But anyway, that's the way it worked. I helped Dad on the farm, and in trade, he lent me the necessary farm equipment and helped me on some rental farm ground. And by the time summer work was done, I was able to buy his half of the pickup. Then I went to Glen, California, 3 consecutive falls, and worked in the rice harvest, corn and bean harvest, and tried to help when Waltz built a new house. Though I doubt I was much help. I was basically a little gopher boy and ornery little bugger. But yeah, I was 18, 19, almost 20. I also went to the Standard Church preparatory class in Grant, Nebraska. I believe that was in 1984. And yes, I burned that air quotes around keepsake stuff long ago. And should I mention that I did meet other girls all along the way and definitely tried to keep my mind open as to a term that was kind of jokingly referred to as deer hunting for the guys. A lot of them would go to the class and they would find their future wife. Yeah, a year or two later, they'd go back and get married. But it seemed like I could not get beyond Marge. I even went through a stretch of time that I tried very seriously to forget her, but it didn't work. And back to the puppy love, yeah, I had carved her name in a tree down the canyon back in the woods. And this stretch of time, I went and found that tree and I carved it back off, even though I couldn't even read it anymore because the tree had grown so much. Very interesting little things to me. So I figured that it was a meant to be thing. And we married in September of '85 and had 4 boys, Bradley, Daryl, Donovan, and Kenton. And I clearly remember being told that we were the picture of perfection as a couple and as a family. Of course, Marge sewed all her dresses, and she sewed a lot of shirts. And out of matching material, yeah, one in particular was sunshine yellow shirts with green John Deere tractors and equipment all over it, and all 4 boys wearing those same shirts. It was quite a deal to go to Spokane or Coeur d'Alene and go shopping. And then I'll jump back. I voluntarily joined the Holdeman Mennonite Church at about 14 years old. My so-called conversion experience, as I remember it, was the local Kootenai Indians were supposedly threatening an uprising of some sort, and it had me fairly freaked out. If when you die and you're not saved, you go to hell. All that indoctrination, yeah, I don't know what hell is, but I still do believe in a hell. I still do believe in a heaven. But I have also lived through hell, and I am also living in heaven on this earth. And somehow I found peace. Or rather, it was just this is another thing that passed situation as I see it now. And that's about the extent of it. I never was what I would call a wild child, and, well, the preachers thought it was pretty vague. Enough so that they thought I should wait a year. When the next year rolled by and nothing else had happened, well, that was all I could go back to. Therefore, it was accepted, and I was baptized into the church in approximately 1977, as near as I can calculate. And in that puppy love stage, after Howard and Helen Seaman and their family moved to Bonners Ferry in 1976, it didn't take very long, and Marge and I had caught each other's eye. I made her a little wooden keychain with her initials, wood burned on one side of it and mine on the other side. And I think she kept that for a treasure for a long time. I remember making her a little wooden treasure chest down in the basement in the house, working on it with the table saw, putting a serious amount of time into it and being very careful that nobody would find out about it, because I knew that folks would not approve of the courtship. Oh my goodness. I don't recall the details of how, but they did find out after it was done. And yeah, basically my only option was to get rid of it. Being fairly newly converted and quite conscientious, and I put down here, at least on the outside, I think I was genuinely. I wanted to do what was right, what was pleasing, and the attaboys, the pats on the back by your elders. You respect your father and your mother, and that feels pretty good. And that's what evidently I was calling peace. And many years later, oh man, we were probably married for 13, 14, 15 years. I remember Dad making the comment to me about a completely different situation. But his comment, I have never forgotten it. What they don't know doesn't hurt me. Very significant comment in my mind. And I've absolutely never forgotten it. So I put that box in the furnace and watched it burn. And in the process of life, I worked numerous jobs, from sawing landing for Ross and Grant Dirks and Glenn Isaac and my brother Charlie, milking cows for Paradise Dairy, splitting posts and rails for Fodge Cedar Products, running skidder, running knuckle boom log loader for both Triple U and Unruh Yarding, and helping Dad on the farm as much as absolutely possible during the summers until he retired in 1993, when I took over the farm. And the thinking behind that was, as Richard came along, he kind of got his help from Dad and established himself in a way to make a living. And then Charlie came along, and he also was helped to get established. And so I was the last one. And it was about time for Dad to retire. He was getting up there. So when Dad retired, I was the one in line to take over the farm, which takes quite a bit to keep a ball rolling. And Dad lived right close by, and he did a super awesome job of handing me the reins. I've often admired it looking back. And I farmed the family farm for 13 years on my own, with lots of help from Dad. He was my right-hand man in many, many cases. And then as Brad came along, and I tell you, that boy, he had a level head on his shoulders for a young kid. He was able to run the stacker, and he did an amazing job. And then Marge and I had hand planted 5,000 3 to 6 inch Colorado blue spruce trees, seedlings, on a 3-foot spacing that looked okay when they were planted. But if you can imagine, a tree doesn't stay small. And it turned out to be much too close later. Those trees helped immensely when we built a house on the farm in the winter of 96 and 97, and then the shop in 2000. And then I'm going to try and jump ahead a little here on, I was 42. I turned 42 years old in 2006. And everybody's journey is different. Don't forget that. And I'm also convinced that love languages of the heart are satisfied only by the true creator of the universe. All other attempts by any other entity, whether it be money, spouse, children, or whatever, still leaves an undeniable void in the center of your soul, which can only be somewhat quieted or drowned out by the hubbub that you choose to listen to that's going on around you. And it seemed like more and more that I had that unfillable void in my heart. I have wondered if I hadn't made my wife kind of my God. I don't know if everybody has heard the comment, happy wife, happy life, or it should be happy spouse, happy house. But when things were good, it was peaceful. It was very nice. Then when that connection was established, for me, it was life was fulfilled to the utmost. I just can't even hardly explain that. But bear with me, folks. I'm working my way through this. We've got a long ways to go. I believe that, having grown up in the Holdeman Mennonite religious system, I only knew about God through the interpretation of that system, and that I never knew him personally at all until this journey began. Until then, I knew only how to be a good Mennonite. My definition, or the definition in my heart then of God, would correlate to that parable of the austere master that sows and reaps where he didn't sow. And if you don't toe his line, you get wiped off the system. You'll get that sharp, hot pitchfork, and you'll feel that to the depth of your being. You better toe his line or else. Austere just said it all to me. Fear and trembling. Love? I could never figure out how love really had any part to do with it, even though I knew my dad loved me. And I was told all my life that God loved me. I don't know that I really felt it ever. He was just toe my line or else. And I am so thankful those feelings and thinking have completely dissipated. And I do find the words love and father really are one and the same. To me, I love to refer to him as Papa or Pappy. I don't need to tell you how I feel about that word, but it just fits. I'll leave you to run your own thoughts. Yes, he is respectful. He is respectable. He needs to be respected. But love, oh my goodness, he is love all the way. And keep in mind, as you read this or you hear this, that one side of the story is not the complete picture. Make sure you understand that. This is my journey, what I lived through. It's not what Marge lived through. It's not what any one of my 4 boys lived through. It's not what my brothers and sisters lived through. This is my journey. And that some of the most horrific and traumatizing memories of mine, Marge has no recollection of whatsoever. Like we will hear more of an actual episode that happened on the basement. And vice versa. I have been made aware of things that Marge remembers me doing. And I have no recollection, and I don't even see how they can be possible. But I don't want to diss her memories. That's her journey. And her memory of me is on the farm auction. I just try and paint a little verbal picture here. Supposedly her only car. I don't remember her only car, but evidently it wasn't being bid on good enough, and I was convinced that it was worth more money than that. And I was supposedly dancing around on the hood of it and letting the people know that it's worth more. I kind of had to chuckle because as a 42-year-old man, I think I would have totaled the car out by doing that. But like I said, I do not want to diss her memories. I don't recall ever being hateful or hurtful or revengeful. There probably was certain things that happened as life was transpiring in that time frame that, yeah, I can remember one little instance where I was angry. That's actually the final straw that got me excommunicated. But I still loved my boy through that. It got so bad at home that I didn't feel like I was a welcome party in or around the house to any extent whatsoever. And when I would go to deliver a load of hay, my dog would run beside the truck until we got to Folks's place about 300 yards down the road, and she would stay at Folks until I came back home. She'd hear the truck coming and she'd race me to the house And when I went back in the house, she would disappear back to folks. So many little things would happen. Questions or difficulties would arise in my heart and head. And I would think, this too shall pass. It may have been a small question, but not the question. Then in the fall of 2000, we as a family took a train trip over 8,000 miles on the tracks, starting from Sandpoint, Idaho, Chicago, Washington, D.C., Chicago, Little Rock, Dodge City, Seattle, Sandpoint, to attend Daniel and Shanna's wedding in Arkansas, and a once in every 10 years or so church conference being held that year in Wichita, Kansas. And I thought, surely, to see so many of God's true people together in a members-only meeting and witness how it all worked would be very, very awe-inspiring indeed. I also thought that being the heads of the households, the men should attend for sure, and the wives would simply take turns with the children at the motel during the meetings. I think it was a day or two, a 2 or 3 day thing. Well, I was wrong in my chauvinistic way of thinking, and quite plainly told so about the wives taking care of the children, taking turns. I think that was really the first time that I really sensed something was definitely amiss. It was bigger than a this too shall pass situation, but it still wasn't the big question. And so again, this too shall pass. I said it twice. All in all, the trip was fun, leaving us all with lots of very good memories. And then in 2002-ish, I was placed on church repentance. My memory is fading a bit, and I don't recall exactly what it was all about, but it ended up lifted with a little experience of sorts, mainly about submission to the system as I see it now. But with that little experience, oh my, I can definitely remember the attaboys and the, what's the word, accolades, the pats on the back, you might say, and the camaraderie was back. And oh yeah, that feels really good. And then about 2003-ish, skip back to 93, 94, taking over the farm. Dad had set the rent for the farm at 33%, 1/3 of the gross, which was actually, I thought, pretty high. But, well, we go. And I started listening to the wrong voice and was caught up in dishonesty concerning the money, primarily rent and taxes. And what came in cash stayed cash. I dipped into that envelope in the freezer, and so did my wife. We were both fully aware of where that cash came from, and we were both fully aware that it did not get recorded. And I did not feel good about it. I'll admit that right up front from day one. But it was fun spending that extra cash on things that we just didn't seem like we could afford otherwise. And in the clearing up of this situation and facing that, oh my goodness, it felt so good to be forgiven by Dad. But on the flip side, the way Dad took it, he took it, the way I remember it, is the rent was set too high, and this caused him, my son, to choose the dishonest route to relieve the stress. And so he took kind of the responsibility back onto himself. That was hard to take for me. Anyway, he ended up lowering the rent, forgiving the past, and lowering the rent for the future. And I remember holding very tight to the Ananias and Sapphira situation in Acts, I believe it is, where they sold a piece of ground and they were both privy to it. And boy, oh boy, I was the only one that seemed to face the music and straighten things up and clear things up. But that's Marge's story. I got to leave that with her. But it seemed like more and more areas we were encountering friction and disagreements between us. And through that, we both ended up on repentance. The dishonesty also added fuel to a very quick to go south. No, that's not what I'm saying. It was from our side on our relationship with folks. That was over the years, and then I just said that it was cleared up. And we faced the tax situation also, and soon it was all resolved on the table and in good standing. Even though financially, things seemed to continue in a decline as far as my farming. The machinery was getting older, and every year it was getting more and more difficult to keep up with it all. And it just seemed like almost like the end of the road. And spring, that wasn't, anyway, spring of 2004, a little experience that I had. No, it was not little. While out among the Colorado blue spruce trees, spraying them for bugs or weeds with a backpack sprayer, the first time I heard a voice. Suddenly I heard a very distinct voice right out of the blue, and I would almost say that I heard it with my ears, but I couldn't have. You wouldn't have heard it if you'd have been standing right beside me. And that voice said, "In quietness and in confidence will be your strength." That's all it said. And visiting with somebody on the phone, you know their voice. 10 days later, they call you. You instantly know who it is just by the sound of their voice. That's how that voice, I knew it was God. And it was an exceptionally beautiful day, and I was affected so deeply, I removed my hat for the rest of it and sunburned for it. And I enthusiastically shared the experience with Mom, since the relationship was so much better by that time between folks and I. And I remember she had a coffee cup with that verse on it. I don't recall sharing it with my wife, but may have, since I felt at that time it was all in conjunction with the church yet. But that summer was more turbulent than before, though I don't recall any particulars other than after summer's work, we went to the Oregon coast for a few days, which we tried to do for several years every year. And on the way, somewhere along the Columbia River, that voice spoke. "This is the last time you will take a trip as a complete family." Just as clearly as in the tree field, same tone, simply stated, very much as a matter of fact. I didn't say anything to anyone. I just tried to absorb it, and it also proved true. That was our last complete family trip. And then my mom had cancer and was declining, passing away in early December of 2005. And there are no words to describe the numbness, desperate, forsaken, lonesome, whipped feelings that were part of that time for me. 5 of us 6 siblings were at her bedside when she left. And Christmas time over the last numerous years was also becoming enough to ruin the whole winter for me. I completely detested it. All the shopping, expectations, and hubbub seemed so totally pagan, so false, so anti-true Christ to me. Even though we never had Christmas trees and such, it was also the most stressful money time, year end, rent due, tax time coming soon time of the year, and all with the dishonesty issue having still hanging over my head. That was it sounds like it was cleared up earlier, but I'm sorry, I'm jumping around here a little bit. It was about to get cleared up real shortly here, but you already heard it. So in general, things continued to deteriorate with the marriage relationship, church, and financially. There just wasn't any light at the end of the tunnel that I could detect, and I stayed very frustrated visiting with the staff, the wife and I. Nothing seemed to work well at all, and after having had my life threatened, the oldest son had gotten involved with drugs and we didn't know it. Mainly meth, I believe, was the bad one, but I ended up moving out of the house and into the camper, parking it on the north side of Bonners Ferry for a while. Then I moved into the cabin, which I had built, with the idea that it could possibly help bring the family back together, which was down across the field and out of sight of the house. I did not live in the house for approximately 5 months, the latter part of 2005, which, in the midst of it all, around Thanksgiving time, Marge packed up the boys and the dog without any communication, as I recall, and left for Othello, Washington, to her brother's place, evidently with no intention of returning. And when I went there to try and communicate, I was met in the yard by her dad and her brother and told that I would not be allowed to see Marge. So I turned around and drove back to Bonners. 2 or 3 days later, Marge called me and asked if she could return, which of course I didn't refuse. I still had my thoughts were in it for the long haul, and we were going to make it work somehow. I didn't know how. I couldn't comprehend not. It just wouldn't work. Through that next summer, Dad was still my right-hand man on the farm, trying hard to help make things work. Brad was 18 and quite a wild child. Sorry, Brad. Was 2 more close behind, and they were wanting to bring friends home that appeared to me to have sticky fingers. And when I set my foot down, things pretty much blew up in my face, creating quite an episode involving horse trailer rewiring, buttons getting pushed, and that's when the first threat to my life actually came about. So yeah, I can see where I've mixed up. You might have to listen to this a couple times to make sense of it. One of the preachers ended up coming to me and asking what I thought should be done. I simply told him that I saw no way opening up for me inside the church and that they might as well excommunicate me. Maybe I could find a breakthrough that way and come back as soon as possible. So that was done. And so then the avoidance kicks in following that system's excommunication. And the table was flipped. I was sitting by myself, shunned. And inside my heart and mind, I did a double take while zipping my lips. Life was becoming more of a blur yet. The avoidance and the icy cold feelings, my reaction to it was not voiced out loud in any way, but deep inside I said, I am over 40 years old and I'm not a child anymore. And there's a definition of love deep in my heart, in the core of my DNA. And what's going on here versus that definition does not match in any way. What is really going on here? And if this is messed up as one of the foundational blocks of the church, what all else is messed up along with it? Something is definitely not right. And I started looking around without talking to anybody, without saying anything out loud. It was like the slow motion detonation of an atomic bomb in the middle of everything I had ever believed in or had been taught my entire life. And then a little bit more, inserting some history. Sequence may not all be perfect, but it is what it is. Mom passed in the December of 2004, and Dad remarried slightly less than a year later to one of the most wonderful women I have ever met. She was truly a jewel, and I told her point blank that you did not put Mom's gloves on. You dipped your hand into the glove material. She was a jewel. Another memory I have of a staff visit. Marge had said something to the effect of, I believe that when David finds what he needs, I will be the first to recognize it. And I thought that was quite interesting. Obviously, I never forgot it. And I have been told since that one of that system's unvoiced, unwrittens is that the church and God are basically synonymous. I doubt that it would be admitted to by any of the members. And let me also insert here that at one point, the drug situation was serious enough that Marge even felt threatened and stayed away for a week or two at one point. And after this, at this time, I believe I was out of the house. I did eventually receive an invitation from Marge, which I felt I needed, an invitation from her before I could physically move back into the house. She did give me that invitation to come back, and the words were okay, but it still felt completely cold, lifeless, and forced. There just wasn't any life whatsoever in the words that I could detect, or the vibes. But at least it was a start, and you must start somewhere, right? How bad can it get? I remember thinking of a rope with multiple knots tied at intervals. And when you got to get to the end of your rope, right? And I'd get to the end of what I thought was the end of the rope, and I'd have a little bit of a extra grip because that knot was there. Pretty soon it'd slip through my hands, and I'd slide down the rope, and I still had rope, and I'd come to another knot. How many times did that repeat? In February 2006, I did move back into the house downstairs on a mattress on the floor. And if I remember right, it was during revival meetings, and I was still kind of the mind, even though nothing made sense. But this has got to be the one true church. And I was still wanting to give everything I had to get back in the church. And I found out in 2023 now that Marge was completely shocked and horrified that I moved in downstairs instead of into our bedroom. Her thoughts were expressed to me in 2023 now. Why didn't he just tell them exactly where to shove it? But if I guess that if that's the way he wants it, well, okay then. Or down that line. The cold, lifeless, and icy feelings never changed. The staff visits were kind of over for me personally because I was expelled unless I requested one, and they felt like it passed their specs. Attending church meetings left me feeling very much like I wanted to carry a portable hole that I could crawl into and hide. I'd poured my heart out to the staff so many times and voluntarily turned it into mincemeat. It seemed like there wasn't anything left to pour. Life simply was not worth living anymore. But the pumper kept on pumping, and I knew better than to commit, should I say it, suicide? I'd faced some of those very thoughts the year before and had dealt with them. I knew better. It felt like something from somewhere deep inside of me was saying that there was something more to life than what I was able to see from my perspective at the time. And if I would just hang in there, things would eventually get better. How? I had no clue whatsoever. I remember listening in utterly stunned silence at one of the last staff meetings when the staff asked Marge how she felt about me moving back into the house, and she answered, yes, it felt good. So much better to have a man around. Nothing seemed to add up. Life had gone out of everything. Absolutely nothing made sense to me anymore. I believe it was sometime in February of 2006. In that very time frame, I ended up going to the doctor, and I called it depression. And he told me that the feedback he would need would have to come from those around me. Couldn't come from me. It would have to come from my family. I can remember how my heart sank because I knew that would never work. Somehow I made it out the door with the meds. And believe it or not, 2 or 3 days later, I could tell a difference myself. It was small, but it was a difference. And the doctor and I stayed in touch for about a year total. Spring farm work, 2006, field work. Lots of ground to cover with smaller equipment. Still had to haul hay and deliver it. Barns to clean and ready for the next crop. Machinery to get last minute ready for summer work. Life had to go on. And I was also starting to consider divorce. Even though I knew what the Bible said about it, it just felt like things were not going to get better and the ship was going down no matter what I did. And that was a saying that I remember Dad using. When a ship goes down, it's me, each man for himself, because a professional swimmer can be drowned quite easily trying to rescue someone who has panicked. Somewhere along the way, I heard a rumor comment about something I had said many times to all of my sons, one of my sons, the oldest one, especially, that as a father, I loved him and I always would, even though I couldn't always support all of his actions. And that every time I told him that, it made him more bitter at me yet. And as you can only try and imagine, that was the last thing that I would ever want. How to clear it up, how to verify, that I did not know. What I did know is that it had to be cleared up directly between him and I. There was no other choice. Then sometime in the midst of spring field work on my 4020 tractor with no cab and an 18-foot wide 3-point hitch cultivator, straight north of our house, over and above the noise of the tractor, if I can insert that, the voice. So, you're contemplating divorce? It felt as if someone chopped me in the back of my neck. It jolted me so hard. And yet I responded instantly. Yes, I was. But that cannot be. It must not be. And right there between me and God alone, I renewed my Mennonite marriage vows, ending it with a promise. And I will not leave until the ship has gone down. Again, instantly, the voice. So, what in your mind will determine that the ship has gone down? Again, my response was instant. When Marge leaves. I didn't feel like it depended on me. It depended on her. That conversation happened fast, and then it was over. That's the last of it. I have never had any recollection of dwelling on it in the 2 to 3 weeks that followed. Then one evening, 2 to 3 weeks later, I went in the house downstairs to go to bed and heard a ruckus of sorts going on upstairs. Soon the family was coming down the stairway, and I was begging inside myself, is there anything I can do to appease or help the situation? How? What? And then the voice. Just go in there, make some small talk, and clear up that rumor. So without hesitation, I opened the door and went into the rec room, as we called it. Made some small talk, just a bit, as my boy walked into his bedroom. I followed. And then I told him I'd heard something and needed to clear it up or clarify it. And I repeated to him what I had heard. He was completely shocked when he looked up at me and said, "What?" I told him that to repeat it was not necessary due to his response. He asked, "You heard that from who?" So I had to tell him that I'd heard it from his mother. It was then that Marge pushed open the door. She had been an uninvited listener, and I was then accused of lying and stirring the pot, and I made her to know that she was not welcome with the conversation at least twice, and that she was making a big decision for me by not leaving the setting. She then asked me, "So what are you going to do? Leave?" "Oh, good. I get the boys." I was so completely horrified, and the thought of tearing things apart more was so far beyond my wildest comprehension. And as you can only try and imagine, that was the very worst living nightmare of my entire life. And she does not recall this situation at all. Similar to the memories that she has about me, which I have no recollection whatsoever of doing. It ended with the tractor conversation distinctly being replayed in my mind as though in an instant, and a clear mental vision, hallucination, or picture in my mind, call it what you want, of Marge walking away, though not necessarily physically at that very moment. She did proceed to go upstairs. I started proceedings for divorce the next day. There didn't seem to be anything left to work with. At that very moment, it was evident to me that the ship had gone down. Then one day after spring work was done, as I came home from town, I drove up to folks' house. We only lived about 300 yards apart. And I went in, and Dad was in the kitchen. I sat down and asked, "Dad, what do you think of having a farm auction?" I don't think he was prepared for that kind of a question. and his head dropped as though he'd been punched. But his response was, with great sadness, "Yeah, son, things just aren't coming together like they should. And you may as well get out of farming while you still have a little bit of wiggle room financially." So we scheduled things with the auction service before I left, which put me into a higher gear yet to get everything ready. All the equipment lined up, grass mowed a bit, the rest of the hay delivered. The auction was set for June 17th, which was really too late for that area for a spring farm auction. I picked out a few small hand tools, and that was about it. Enough for a small box in my pickup. A farm without equipment or tools doesn't leave much to do, and I was glad for autopilot. And that farm auction day, in my terminology, my personal way of putting things into words, is I found the switch to my mind somewhere behind the couch, and I put it in the off position. I put it into the autopilot position, and then I shoved that couch back up against it and forgot that it was there. That's the only way I made it through that day. I think somewhere around the tractor conversation time is when I started thinking about Alaska. A good friend had moved, who became a good friend, had moved down from Sterling, Alaska, and he was a foreman for the Teamster crew up in Prudhoe Bay. And maybe I will insert here that at no time did Alaska union big bucks. That's not what was in my mind at all. The big bucks never entered my equation. I did have some family obligations. I did make some vows. I did make some promises. And yeah, we're going to get to a little bit more of that real quick. But this person that moved down was Marty Canijo, and we had become pretty good friends. He had told me stories about it, about the work in the oil patch, the oil field and all. So I went and talked to him, being quite surprised to find him home, because he wasn't home very much. The conclusion was, you can't do anything in Alaska from Bonners Ferry, Idaho. So to get there was my plan. And like I said, I had financial family obligations that I needed to meet. And if I couldn't meet those, I would rather die trying. And if I didn't leave the country, physical and mental survivability was in very serious question, even though being on medication for depression and having a girlfriend. Yep, I was one messed up dude, for sure. I cannot describe how thankful I am that my Papa, kept me from pure hell on that score, in that we never went over the cliff. And in some weird way, I still feel that she helped keep me alive through that time. Somehow deep inside, I felt there was still more to life somewhere, somehow, and that I just wasn't able to see it yet. June, July, and August of 2006. Auction sale was June 17th. After the farm auction to July 4th, I don't recall much, but would have had to get ready to leave. New tires on the pickup. It was a long stretch. I checked the wheel bearings on the 18-foot fifth wheel camper behind a Toyota Tacoma. Extended cab. It was a pretty good load by itself. I didn't need too much stocking in that. And one last staff visit alone. I remember it, but don't recall the details other than that they were worried about me. One of them said, "When you do something, you appear to do it with your whole heart, and I'm worried about you." And I can look back on that comment from today as a big encouragement. One of my nieces was to be married on July 9th in Othello, Washington, and I kind of wanted to be there. She was kind of a special one to me, if there can be specials. So I left Bonners Ferry on July 5th, staying in my camper at a favorite hay customer's place in Kerrywood area that night, then on to Rathdrum to Peter and Paula Bowers, one of my very favorite hay customers. I didn't know why I was drawn to stop there, because there seemed to be something quite amiss between us. I just still wanted to say goodbye. I wasn't there very long, and somehow that very subject was addressed. And I was quite quickly informed that there was absolutely nothing to it, for sure on their part anyway. And I was so relieved and thankful. And while I was there, somehow Peter Bauer and Irv Madsen from Bonners Ferry were talking on the phone, and Irv thought he needed to have a word with me too. "Dave, would you mind if I gave your name and number to a Gerald and Wendy Gardner, some of our very good friends in Anchorage?" My response was, "Not at all, Irv. If there is anything I've ever needed in all my life, it's friends, and it's now." Not realizing the impact of my own verbiage until later. I stayed there a night or two and then on to Othello. Standard Mennonite custom at the time was to have the Saturday evening meal together with most all the family and visiting young folks, then set the table for the next day's reception lunch after the service. I was able to make it through that evening, but the thought of the next day was too much. My niece graciously released me from it. The next morning, I went to another family member's house where Dad and Mom were. And the only way I can describe that is it was very much like a living funeral. Goodbye. I'm on my way to Alaska. And I don't know when I will be back or if I will even come back. And leaving it that, with hugs, I walked out of that house and never looked back. I left Central Washington the next morning, heading as straight north as possible soon after they left for service. I drove fairly hard, but then hard and fast are two different things. With a Toyota Tacoma pulling an 18-foot camper, when I got close to Whitehorse, Yukon Territories, Canada, the voice. "What are you running from? There is no one following you. There's no one behind you. Just slow down and relax and enjoy the lack of stress." It wasn't said as a question or a reprimand in any way, but as a fact. And I realized that it was also the truth. There wasn't anyone chasing me. So I slowed down. I felt nearly like a tire would possibly feel when the valve stem was removed. Soon after I left Whitehorse, I took advantage of an amazing hot springs. A short drive on the very next day, there was another one, and it too was enjoyed to the fullest extent. And about that same time, I discovered I realized that I'd somehow taken a wrong turn, missing the Alcan Highway, and was instead headed towards Dawson City, Yukon Territories. Well, I guess that I'd ask at the next gas station about the possibility of getting through the roundabout and over the top way. And they said, sure, the road goes through. It might get a bit rough, but it does go through. So I kept on going, spending an extra day in Dawson City, having been convinced inside that someday I would find a big gold nugget. A bit more about this later. Meeting an awesome elderly couple while doing a little gold panning, and we stayed in contact until they died. Carol and I went and visited them shortly after I moved to Ohio, up in Canada, Ontario. Anyway, I finally ferried across the mighty Yukon River, proceeding up to the top of the World Highway connecting through to Tok, Alaska. In that little stretch, which is probably 50 to 70 miles, I had an internal experience or vision or hallucination or whatever you want to call it. It was not real life. Much like the voice, I could say, but it wasn't the voice. It did not happen in reality as the human eye perceives it, but I'll tell you the only way I can. I stood up from a very cramped, scrunched up position, and I heard a very distinct, raspy, rubbing sound. Yet I didn't know where it was or where it came from, though it was very close. Immediately upon standing and looking around, I found the day to be completely perfect. The sun was close to the 9 or 10 o'clock position. The sky was completely cloudless. The air was mountain fresh. The temperature was perfectly comfortable, and the terrain was as flat as Kansas or Prudhoe Bay. But what really caught my attention was the horizons. They were so far away and in all directions. I could see as far as my eye could see, and that only looked like it was just a small start. And as I stood there and tried to absorb it all, I happened to glance down at my feet, and a gasp caught in my throat. That's what made that sound. I couldn't believe it. My feet were inside a newish looking cardboard box, about 18 inches square and maybe 18 inches deep, and the flaps were open. The flaps opening, sliding and rubbing against each other, was exactly the sound I'd heard when I stood up. And it also fit the direction from which it had come. And if you can only try to imagine 18 inches by 18 inches by 18 inches, I was 42 years old and I came up out of that box. The lid had been closed. Scrunched, cramped, restricted. Yeah. My first thoughts was that that box was the religious system I had left behind. Immediately, Satan whispered, and in a shaming, accusational way, "That is surely blasphemy. Surely you don't want to even think that, let alone say it, do you?" My response, "Oh, no, it couldn't have been the church then. It must have been the marriage. But it couldn't have been the marriage because God sanctions marriage. As real time moved along, I have definitely concluded that the box was a religious system of man and not the marriage. I took my time the rest of the way to Wasilla, arriving on July 15th, almost sooner than I had expected, and I immediately called Marty Canijo, who was in Prudhoe Bay, at work. What should I do? Where should I go? He gave me some directions, and off I went till, in my language, in my way of putting words together, I bumped my nose. Then I'd go fishing. Then I called Marty again. Probably 3 or 4 times, it seems, I repeated that round. And he then, hang on here, he had given me one name and number to call. So I left a message there because there was no one answered it. I put in an application a little ways out of Wasilla one day, and on the return, I saw a log house building place and someone out there peeling logs. Well, I knew how to do that. It was just like my little cabin I'd built. So I swung in there and talked to the peeler. Everything was, yeah. So I went and got a knife from where he'd said, went back to the log pile and started peeling. It felt so good to be doing something for exercise, and it sounded like a pretty good wage, too. By the foot, I guess it was. They said I could work any hours that I wanted. Take your pick, go fishing, whatever, while I was working towards the north slope. It turned out that the one guy thought I knew the other guy, and the other guy thought I knew the one guy, and I knew neither one of them, though I still had fun, stayed in shape, and never saw a dime from it all, other than a place to winter my camper. Kind of funny about it all when I look back. Then one day I got a call from an Alaskan number, and it was Gerald Gardner, the friend Irv had given my number to. He had business fairly close by and wanted to meet up. I told him where I was, so the next day he drives in and we met and chatted for a while, and though I'll never forget it, nothing real special grabbed me. Just a very nice, down-to-earth, realistic person, originally from Montana. I ended up leaving my pickup at their place when I flew north not long after. Another day while I was peeling, I got a call from the number Marty had given me. And after many questions, some of which I felt that I had no business even knowing the answer to, then he'd tell me the answer anyway. And he wanted to meet up at the Teamster Hall in Anchorage the next morning. And I told him, well, that I could easily make it in for job call yet that afternoon. He said, great, we'll see you there this afternoon then. So I brushed myself off and went in, and pretty well got the lowdown about the do's and don'ts in working towards a Teamster union job on the North Slope in Prudhoe Bay oil field. I realistically felt like I was in a different country, a million miles from anyone I'd known, a man without a country, a fish out of water. The butterflies in my stomach were, they were thick. They reminded me of the yellow ones we had back home around the mud puddles. Then the voice. When I was wondering what to do and where to go and on down the list, then the voice. Just do your best, one thing at a time as you're asked, the safest way you know how, and you will get along just fine. And instantly, those butterflies all landed, and for the most part, never flew again. For the most part, I said. You heard that, didn't you? And let me insert here voice messages I didn't see a person. All I heard was the voice. But you can't see me either. When I said, you'll get along just fine. But you don't need to see me to hear the body language. They ran me through the necessary hoops to get the credentials for the North Slope, and I found myself on Alaska Airlines, northbound on August 14th, 1 day less than a month from my arrival in Wasilla, not to return to civilization for 15 weeks and 3 days. The boss himself picked me up, took me to the Prudhoe Bay Hotel, told me to go ahead and check in and make myself comfy, supper, breakfast the next morning, and be ready at the front door in the morning by 5:30. And the foreman's name was Steve Donnelly. We've stayed in contact periodically since. He retired and moved to Oregon. He calls me once in a great while, and I call him once in a great while. I rode with one of the older hands for a round or two in a brand new Kenworth with a 30-yard end dump trailer. Then we switched seats for another round or so, soon to be having more fun than I knew what to do with. My internal question was, why? How? When you've just filed for divorce from your wife, left your children, left the church, left everything else you've ever known your entire life, joined the union, almost like the mafia, and up here like this in a far country? Yup, I thought I was living out the prodigal son's life, is about how I felt. How can fun be part of it anyway? But neither could I deny the fact that I was having fun, and I was happy. I felt so free. And sometime during that first hitch, I slowly weaned myself, as per directions, from those depression meds with absolutely no ill effects. August 14th plus 15 weeks and 3 days, I was going to be basically forced out for a 1 week R&R, rest and relaxation, recuperation, whatever you want to call it. So on a Thursday morning, I flew to Anchorage. I got a taxi to Gerald's and shoveled 18 inches of snow off my pickup. Then went and found a motel in the Wasilla area. Gerald was batching and at work. Wendy was in Texas with their daughter, and I really didn't know them very good yet. I kind of enjoyed the first 2.5 days off, but the other 4.5 days, I was so bored I didn't know what to do with myself. I think I called Gerald on Wednesday morning I think Gerald called me on Wednesday morning and invited me for that night. He said he would gladly take me to the airport the next morning and that I was welcome to go with him to Bible study that night too. So we made it out that way. That was the first friends meeting I ever attended. I just sat there watching, listening, and observing. It was definitely a different way than what I was used to. The women had just as much to say as the men did. I thought they were to take the back seat more, be quieter. Well, this is the way they do it. Okay, fine. We went home, to bed, and to the airport in the morning, northbound again. Pickup left at Gerald's again. This hitch was 7 weeks long, putting my time off in February. The divorce was finalized on January 17th of 2007. This is 2007. The final shockwave of the slow motion atomic bomb, leaving not one stone upon another in my entire world. Wendy got me a ticket for Idaho, and with that trip coming up, I immediately felt the need to go back on meds till after it was passed. I kind of blitzed through Anchorage, and when I arrived at folks in Bonners, I really didn't know what to expect. I stepped into folks' house and quietly asked Dad if I was even welcome there. And his response was, "Of course you are. You're my son." But as you can only try and imagine, it was a very, very awkward. Though what's it called? The grace was definitely there in abundance. I vividly remember that welcome from my dad, and taking care of taxes, that's about all, and back north. Blitzing through Anchorage again for another 10-week hitch on the slope, putting it in late April. The job wasn't quite done, but it was starting to warm up, and there was a little bit of mud showing up, and that's a whole nother story. That's just a whole nother story. Somewhere in this general time frame, I bought a CD with the song, "I Don't Need to Understand. I Just Need to Hold His Hand," by the Stutzmans. And if it would have been possible to wear it out, believe me, I would have. And it's still a very, very favorite today. And in March, I found that CD in Bonners, possibly on that trip home, because I was there for a while. In March, Dad had had a kidney removed due to cancer. And when the tests finally all came back, I got the call, and it sounded like he only had a few months left. The winter season was basically over. Like I said, the mud was starting to show up a little bit, and we were working on the ice. So they let me go. I ended up spending 6 days in Anchorage, A-Town as we call it up there, before going to Idaho, where things weren't actually happening quite as fast as it had sounded. I ended up between Idaho and Washington, staying 9 weeks. And it was all okay. I had my own personal wheels, which helped a lot. Somewhere along the way, also in this rough time frame, Peter Bauer had made the comment and offer, with excitement, of course, that Wasilla Convention was such and such a time, the end of June, and if I was at all interested in going to it, they would fly up just to be someone I'd know to attend with. And it kind of went in one ear and out the other. Then convention time in Idaho came while I was there, and Irv Madsen invited me. While I was thinking about it, kind of wanting to go, though mostly out of respect to Irv, and wondering what would happen if I would be asked where I'd gone. What would I answer? Then Satan said in his customary accusational, guilt-tripping way, "Are you really thinking of going to that? Wow, you are a lowdown, lower than I even thought you were. Would you actually kick your dad in the stomach while he's down with cancer? After all he's taught you and given his life to? Really? And what? What will you tell them when they ask you the next morning where you went last night? Why did you have to get all dressed up? Huh? What are you going to say then? Huh? Huh?" Then immediately, the voice, "You're old enough to make your own decisions. You've gone out other evenings since you're here, and you've never been asked any questions afterwards concerning the wheres or what fors. You know how to come in and go to bed quietly. It's up to you. You're old enough to make your own decisions." And that made the most sense to me, so I went. Arriving just a tiny bit late, Irv saw me the instant I cracked the door. He leaped up and seated me. I listened to the nice enough message, taking special note of the mixed seating. I heard the singing, nice songs, though somewhat unfamiliar. It was all very well organized until right after the last prayer. Then the chicken chatter started. It seemed to me then it was immediately, where you been, what you doing, or what I'm going to do, where you from, and on and on. I stood around and visited a while. The crowd seemed to be thinning down, and soon I made my way to the car and left, laughing up my sleeve at just another group of people who think they have it. I went home to folks. I went to bed totally unimpressed. Within a week and a half or so, I found myself in Washington, helping Brother Charlie on his farm, cutting and raking hay. Round and around the field I went, wondering, pondering, thinking about where to from here. What's the options? I supposed I could stay at my brother's for a while, maybe, but that just didn't seem right. I thought of Bonners Ferry, and it was like seeing an insurmountable, solid, black concrete wall. No doors, no windows, no ends. I thought of Alaska, but all I had there was a pickup and camper. Nothing seemed real inviting about that. The job was a winter job, and it was over. I didn't figure I could draw unemployment because I wasn't a resident. Where to from here? Then the voice. And I hesitate to even tell you this, but I can't deny the fact that this is what the voice said. You have been here long enough. Your attitude and your lack of bitterness has been witnessed, and it's time you go back home. I heard the voice. I heard the word home very distinctly, but I saw the word Alaska as if it had been played on a running message screen with red lighted letters. You've seen them before. It was spelled Alaska. There was absolutely no mistaking it, no denying it. And immediately thereafter, Peter's comment that just went in one ear and out the other played across my mind. I soon called Peter and asked if that offer was still on the table. Yes, of course it is. So I gave him my flight confirmation numbers, and Paula got their tickets coinciding with mine for Alaska, 3 seats together to Anchorage. Wasilla Convention 2007, starting Wednesday evening. I'm not sure. I'm sure I never actually sat on the leading edge of the bench, but just about immediately, that's the way I felt inside. Something deep inside of me said, what in the world is going on here? 2 plus 2 is coming out to a solid 4. Davy, I think you'd better pay real close attention to this. What did I hear? I really don't know. I heard with my ears like normal, but that is not what impressed me. It wasn't words. It wasn't the speaker. It was much deeper and unexplainable. Even I didn't really know I had heard what was happening, even at the time. Meetings were Thursday morning, Thursday afternoon, Thursday evening, Friday morning, Friday afternoon, Friday evening, breakfast, lunch, and dinner on site, and visitors were welcome to stay for the night. I'd had enough. Salmon were running, and I wanted one, being a farm boy from northern Idaho and landlocked. So I went up to Willow Creek to catch one. I arrived to find that parking lot completely full. I found a place, and took my brand new ugly stick pole with a brand new reel and headed for the riverbank, just to find it so full of people that there wasn't room for any more. They call it combat fishing, and that wasn't for me. So I stood there and watched their technique for a while, then went back to the pickup for a nap. I planned to wait it out for it to thin down, maybe midnight. I was in the pickup for just a little bit when someone walking across the parking lot turned between my pickup on the driver's side and the vehicle next to me and walked right by my door. And my fishing pole tip had been sticking over the back of the tailgate, maybe 8 inches. And it must have caught his sleeve because I heard it twing a little bit. He disappeared into the woods, and I don't really know what made me turn around and look. Then I really looked. My pole was gone. He had stole it as he walked right by me. I jumped out of the pickup. I ran into the woods a bit, but it was kind of dim in there, and I was a bit of a chicken with the possibility of a moose or a grizzly bear. I sputtered, jumped back in the pickup, and drove down the road in the direction he'd gone. Sure enough, there was several poles leaning up against a bush. One of them could be mine, all right. But there were also 2 guys in the camper there, too. Was it the voice? I don't really know. But it was a short internal conversation, maybe just between my own ears. Is your pole personalized? No. Okay. Then how are you going to identify it? I don't know that I can, if questioned. Okay. Are you willing to fight for it? No, not at all. I'm not a fighter. Okay, then how are you going to how are you planning on catching a fish in a river without a pole? Oh boy, I drove back by those poles and those 2 guys on my way out, and I kept right on driving, right back to my camper on the convention grounds, and still got a decent night's rest and never missed a meeting. The following week, Peter and I went fishing. Paula went home, back to Coeur d'Alene, Rathdrum, wherever. It was a short, fast, and fun week, ending back in A-Town, Anchorage. We called it A-Town up there. Peter flew away, and Sunday morning meeting was as normal, except with a potluck lunch after. Then a time for sharing about what was gleaned from convention in the early afternoon, and as normal, I sat quietly listening, thinking, watching, and gleaning myself until the sharing was basically over, when the speaker suddenly turned and asked me out of the blue if, perchance, I wanted to share anything. I instantly wilted and knew as well as the others that I was home. My heart had found home or freedom at last. I can't explain it to you. I thought it was with the friends, or the 2x2s as they are called sometimes, or referred to sometimes. And of course, I knew Gerald and Wendy quite well by that time also. I went back to the peninsula, and I found a friend I'd met on the slope who invited me to stay at his place, which I did, attending meetings at Norm Cass's and other places through the summer and fall. Then he went to work as a cook and left me at his place alone, a welcoming, quiet time, but still very, very perplexing deep inside. What does one do with all you have been taught all your life. After a disaster, it takes a while to organize the cleanup. And I was definitely still a disaster. There was not one stone left upon another. In my world, it was completely start over time. Get rid of the past time. But how? And I remember going through a stretch where in my conversations with Papa, I'll just have to put it this way. I gave everything I'd ever learned, ever been taught, back to him. Take it all and pass it through your filter, Papa, and help me to keep that which I need to keep. Help me to retain that, but help me to discard all the stuff that is unnecessary and that was detrimental. Pass it through your filter. And as bad as I utterly detest paperwork, I felt like I should write things from the past that I wanted to get rid of. And as I wrote, it seems like I could feel the toxins draining out through my arm and through the pen. Gerald and Wendy were pretty concerned about me, but I assured them that it was something I needed to do. A couple Mennonite couples stopped in for a few days, looking around for to move up, and the summer and fall went by jobless, and I was getting desperate for work. And with money running out, keeping up with my obligations, and finally, with no other choice, I stayed at Gerald's in Anchorage. Their home became my home. I ended up getting a short job studying tires at a local car sales shop. And this is a little funny for you. 995 tires times $5 a piece in 9 days was quite a stud fee. I found out the benefits of bag balm and Aleve. And then I went and got a small moose, if there is such a thing, which is a story and another little fun story all of its own. And while I had been on the peninsula, I had found a piece of property that seemed to have my name on it. But I needed time up north for that to happen. I needed 20,000 cash. And I thought that was a bargain. Finally, November 29th, I was able to go north again, only this time for Norcon, working for Marty Canijo. 6 weeks on the job and 1 week off. Just exactly what I needed. Much appreciation to one of the Mennonite couples, one of the guys that moved up. I was out of money, and he lent me a couple $1,000 to carry on with life and said, pay it back whenever. Pretty well. Much appreciation to that man. I don't forget him soon. It didn't take too long on the new job, and some of the guys were wondering what kind of drugs I was taking, because I was happy all the time. And if I was taking some drugs, would I share them? Sometime in late February 2008, before my second R&R, I called my sister Beth. A nice chat turned sad when I told her in my excitement that I would soon be able to purchase that property I had found. She ended up in tears. She had been praying that I would not make Alaska permanent. I had been away from the church too long, and she was hoping that I would be coming back soon. I'm not actually sure if God was mentioned. The feeling dampened isn't even close. It felt like a big bucket of salty ice water. The leftover water from homemade ice cream got dumped all over me or my heart. About 1 to 3 days later, I got a call from my brother Richard. A bit of chit-chat, though not much, because I think the family is kind of known for being fairly plain and upfront about things, though not unkind. Bro, Dave, I know you have some quiet time along the way, 'cause we all do. In yours, do you ever have thoughts about coming back to Bonners and cleaning up your mess? Me. No, I guess I don't. I don't really feel like it is my mess, or a mess that I could even clean up. Bro. Oh, Dave, that gives me a caught a baseball right in my stomach feeling. That makes me just sick. You know, I'm going to pray for you that God will send confusion to you so that you can see what really is right. Oh, wait. I can't do that without your consent. Me. You know, if I'm not doing what's really right, I really think I would want to be the very first one to know about it. So, yes, you have my consent to do that. Bro. Oh, okay then. I'll do that. And you know, I've wondered for a while, I wondered quite a while, where that comment that I can't do that without your consent, and God is not the author of confusion. Where did that all come from? But I kind of think I know. I don't remember more than that of the finish off, but that's my memory of that phone conversation. It was also the second bucket of salty ice water within about 3 days. But either this one was a bigger bucket, or maybe my temperature was still down from the first one. I don't know. Back in camp that evening, I was abnormally alone in my room. Normally, we were two guys to a bedroom, separate beds, of course, for the night. I was utterly sick at heart. I was desperate and on autopilot once again. Before I crawled into bed, I knelt down and I poured my guts all over that bed. God, Father, I know you're there, and I think I've been following you, but I've got to be sure it's you, the one that really created the world, and not the one that just says he did. The real God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And I know your word tells me you're not the author of confusion. But would you possibly waive that for me just this once? If I'm not following you, please send me confusion in so much that I cannot function physically tomorrow. And please don't let this prayer be intercepted by any other entity. And with that, I crawled into bed, not really expecting to sleep much, if any. But I slept like a rock. And when I got up, when I woke up the next morning, I wasn't dizzy. I knew what needed to be done, and I did it. I had an appetite. Breakfast was good. The sun came up where it was supposed to. It went down where it was supposed to. I watched, I waited, I listened. Nothing unusual happened. And the next day, the same thing repeated itself. The third day started out the same way. But close to noon, I was in the fuel truck by myself, and my buddy was in a pickup a ways away and radioed me to check my location and let me know that he was catching up to me. He wanted to know where I was at. And I told him. And he ended with DJ, as I had become to be called up there. There's too many Davids. And so Charlie went by CJ, and I says, call me DJ. He ended with, DJ, I sure wish you'd share the drugs you're taking. I had been accused jokingly, of course, of being on drugs because I was happy all the time. I responded with, I would if I could, buddy. I would if I could. And then 3 songs played through my mind, and I do not know to this day if I was singing those songs at the top of my voice, at the top of my lungs, or the top of my heart, but I have never recalled being hoarse. The first song was, I know in whom I have believed. The second song was one of his own, and I tweaked a couple words later to fit what came across to my heart. I do not know what lies ahead for me, but this I know, I'm not alone. I've found a friend who I can stand beside. He claims me as one of his own. One of his own is all I want to be. Where he may lead, I'll follow on. For this I know, whatever comes to me, I'll always be one of his own. Verse 2, it's my desire, while on this earthly shore, to walk the road that he is on. It's my desire to know that evermore he'll keep me as one of his own. Then the chorus, and then verse number 3, where my path leads beyond the sands of time, when I shall pass to worlds unknown, I'll climb those stairs with my weak hand in his, content to be one of his own. The third song was Blessed Assurance. And just as I was done singing, I'll just put it that way, the voice, do you know, are you aware of what's happening, of what's going on? This is your answer. Unmistakable in any way whatsoever. It was the same tone, the same voice that I'd heard all along. Then, much like the cardboard box scene I explained earlier, he gave me another crystal clear mental picture. I know it was Jesus himself sitting on a plain wooden bench. Just his face was blurred like they do on TV to hide a person's identity. And I was a half-grown black lab puppy sitting with my butt firmly planted on his right toes. I was facing to his right, and he was gently reaching out, petting the back of my head and down my back, while I ducked my head a little bit in anticipation and tried to soak it in. That was the grand finale, at least up to that point. As the French call it, I professed to my papa not a religious system of any kind in February of 2008 in Prudhoe Bay, Alaska. The first one, I don't know or care and never will. I relaxed inside and out, and went back to being happy. According to my buddy's testimony, I was still happy, which I see that right now as I'm speaking it, and it's a treasure. I also went on R&R and bought that property. Another little insert. I don't recall the date at all, but I believe Richard called me one day when I was heading from Anchorage to Sterling, down on the peninsula, and he told me in very saddened tones that even though we didn't talk very often, he detected that every time we did talk, I was more comfortable with where I was than I had been before. That was and has been a real heartwarming encouragement to me indeed, though it definitely was not meant as an encouragement from his side by any stretch of the imagination. May of 2008, I flew to Idaho, staying at Dad's. The divorce forced sale of the place in Idaho needed to be taken care of, and the potential buyers and us, in a very reasonable time frame, were able to come together with an agreement that everyone involved could easily accept and live with. Marge and the 3 youngest boys were planning to move to southeast Arkansas. I'll be nice here and call it Dumas. And the 8th grade graduation of my youngest son from the private church school. It all came together while I was there. But the biggest and most absolute shocker to me came upon my arrival. The first time I saw Marge. She had completely changed from the woman that I had divorced to the one I had married in the beginning. My jaw dropped. I could hardly believe what I saw, what I was seeing. She was beautiful. And yet the stressed look in her eyes tore my heart out. The day after the graduation, the U-Haul truck was there, and Mennonite friends and relatives were helping load. I wandered over from folks for a bit, but I felt like a fish out of water and soon wandered away again. Back to Dad's, though I couldn't shake the way Marge looked. Even the extremely stressed look didn't mask it. It very nearly tore my heart out of my chest, but there was nothing I could do about it. Even though I offered to drive the truck south, they turned it down. That was no hard feelings on my part for sure. A day or two later, when I got up in the morning, I was just starting to go downstairs when suddenly I felt impressed to specifically ask for a bit of extra help. So I turned around and did just that. Very seldom I get on my knees because I feel like prayer is a conversation between my ears. Papa's living inside. We're always talking. He's a part of me. I'm a part of him. Breakfast was normal. Then we migrated to the living room for devotions together, as was folks' normal custom. Afterwards, stepmom started to clean the kitchen up. Then Dad said, "Dave, I'd like to rub hearts a bit. What's going on? You've divorced your wife. You've left your family. You've left God and his church and everything you've ever known, joined the union, and are working way up there in the oil field amongst all those heathens. Yet you appear to be so happy and so free. You can give someone a bad time. I always like to goose the guys in the back of the leg. Watch them jump. Not hurt, just goofy. And then let loose with a genuine sounding belly laugh. You're even making overtures of love towards your wife and your oldest son in his hopeless situation. What is the deal? What is going on anyway?" I had sensed it coming from upstairs. I had asked for extra help, and it was there and available. And let me insert here that taught all my life to respect your elders, obey your father and mother. And when you're asked a question, you answer in a respectful way. And this was Dad. And he wasn't only Dad, he was a well-known preacher in the church. My knees were shaking, my heart was thumping, and I was in a complete cold sweat while it was happening. And then all of a sudden, I felt a calmness, and what popped out of my mouth was not my own words, but neither can I deny that my vocal cords rattled. It was, just keep reading. Just keep reading. That's all I said. That's all that was said, that I could hear anyway. And my heart knew that his heart knew exactly what was meant. It was over. The conversation turned in a completely different direction. Then with R&R over and back to work up north, and I was granted time off for Wasilla Convention. About Friday night of that convention, I asked Andy Scholl, super awesome guy, about the details of the way the invitation would be given, and it was quite familiar to me, and of course I showed my decision. Afterward, I again asked Andy, knowing that there was to be a baptism, what would hinder me from being part of it? They consulted a bit, but quickly concluded that there was no reason not to go ahead. So I was baptized on June 29th, 2008 in Wasilla Lake. And the Friends proved to be a major stepping stone for me. But I do not go to any meetings of any kind anymore. I don't believe that God can be put in any kind of a box or a religious system. I have no hard feelings towards the Friends whatsoever. They are good people, just like the Mennonites, the Holdeman Mennonites, wonderful people. I believe it was also sometime in 2008-ish that I did go to a Holdeman church service. And very much unusual for me, I walked up the center aisle and sat about 2/3 of the way up. Well into the service, the voice said, "Are you aware of where you're sitting and how you are sitting?" I did a double take, maybe a triple take. My normal would have definitely been a back row seat. And even then, I would have been slouched down. The more out of sight, the better. Into that portable hole is where I desperately wanted to crawl. And it was pointed out by one of the workers of the Friends when I related that. He looked at me and he says, "Right there is where you really, really realized that they have no more power over you." And oh me, oh my, I haven't forgot that yet either. What had I learned about God? He was a warped being that I really didn't want anything to do with as a Mennonite. But what I learned from God was He is my everything. He is my God. He is my Father. He is my Papa. My sun rises and sets by Him, on Him, and in Him. The sun is always shining and the sky is always blue. Each new day is a new adventure, like a cup of fresh life, and will be till the end of time as I know it. That which I have learned about God from man, I will spend a good share of the rest of my life on learning that, and it will likely still plague me for the rest of my life. And I think I'm just going to go ahead and continue to read and narrate the rest of this. After I was baptized, the next day I headed for the peninsula, aiming to go king salmon fishing, ending up on the bank of the Kasilof River. And I did catch one king. But what I remember more than that fish is I would fish for a while, then sit and relax for a while. And I repeated that. Then the voice. You need to call your wife. You have something to tell her. So I did. She was busy making supper, and yeah, I said wife, but ex-wife. I hate that term. I absolutely hate that term. And I thought I needed her undivided attention. So we agreed we'd talk a bit later and hung up. The voice spoke up and said, that was self. You don't need her undivided attention to tell her what you need to tell her. The internal conflict didn't last long. I simply called her back and told her that I was sorry for being the person that I had been, and I guess I'll just leave it at that. She ended up in tears, asking if there would be any way that I would or could reconsider, because it didn't have anything to do with the church whatsoever, which I agreed to do, being kind of perplexed. But let me ask, what is marriage? I am the father of her children. She is the mother of mine. And though the piece of paper with our signatures on it got crumpled up and thrown away, is that what marriage is? I think it goes deeper than the paper, which I agreed to do for her sake only, with an open mind and in the best way I knew how. 2 to 3 days later, the song clearly came to me as the answer. I intend to go through with him, and it's in the Christian hymnal that they go by. I would very clearly declare that I still have a love in my heart for Marge, even though it may be seriously weak as towards the thought of living together. With such an extreme language barrier, I tend to think it would be impossible. I also remember how 2 verses stood up off the page to where I personally saw a bit of a shadow under the black letters. And I've also looked them up, and there is only 2 verses in the Bible in different places that with man it is impossible, but with God all things are possible. And I think one of them is worded just a little bit different, but there's only 2 places. I also believe that one should do what is right and not just what is easy. And I place a very high value on my quality of sleep, and I aim to keep it that way as best I can, with help from Papa. After all, he's okay with the fact that I am human, and I know that I will make mistakes. I'd like to clarify that my ex-wife, and I have stayed friends, and I don't know exactly how to word this. I don't know how to talk to her. If I send her what warms my heart, it so quickly causes offense, it seems. And I have no interest on my part to receive something that's coming from the church, because I see it as, I'm sorry to use this word, but calling a spade, it's a cult. I hate that word, but I feel like I'm a survivor of it. The continuing dilemma for, how long? The CGCM, Church of God in Christ Mennonite, dictates that I cannot return to my wife until after I would become a member in good standing. And by its adherence to the practice of shunning, judges me to be bound for hell unless I am a member in good standing. Therefore, the CGCM places itself between most of its members and the throne of grace, rendering Jesus Christ's death on the cross and the veil of the temple being rent in twain as irrelevant and in vain. Not so in my heart. Mankind is not my judge anymore, ever again. And only the wisest ones are able to recognize the above and walk that fine line in peace. Exactly how, I do not know. The CGCM also dictates that she cannot remarry, and that if she leaves, she will also be shunned and hell-bound. So what is marriage? Is it just the paperwork bearing signatures? I think not. Marge is the mother of my children, and I am the father of her children, and that will never change. Let not man destroy that which God has put together. I have owned my personal responsibility in letting man and a religious system destroy my marriage, and I absolutely could never go back and be a part of the CGCM system or any other religion without living a lie. Back to February of 2008, as time went by, I spent most of it on the slope working, while for Norcon the schedule was fairly intense, being 6 weeks on and 1 week off, definitely enabling me to catch up, keep up, and gain financially. And with only 1 week off at a time, the camper was sufficient, but I also knew that winter was coming. I ended up having electricity put in on the corner of the property and purchased a 40-foot reefer van trailer that had already been somewhat converted to living quarters, having some countertop and cabinets and a queen-size bed in it, being insulated. Pretty simple to heat with a little Toyo 30 diesel stove. That reefer trailer sufficed for my living quarters while off work for a total of 4.5 years. I very religiously kept up with meetings with the friends when I was off work and was able to take time off to go to convention both in Wasilla and once or twice in Juneau and another time in Bonners Ferry, all of which I found to be very, very helpful. The only thing with the friends that did not resonate with me at all from the very first was the public prayers in convention and special meetings. Somehow that just did not add up to what I could feel good about participating in. Sometime in the mid-2008-9 winter, while up north, the Norcon bosses asked me if I would be interested in doing a quick transfer to become a fueler for Price Gregory International with no negative effects whatsoever on my Norcon gig. I accepted and was quickly transferred, not even going to town to go through the proper channels. When finished for this Price Gregory, I went right straight back to Norcon. Then in late 2009, the Norcon company itself ended. I don't know all the details why or how. While being off work in December 2009, I decided that it would be beneficial to get my GED, which I am very exceedingly proud of to this day. I obtained that right at the very end of December 2009. Shortly thereafter, the Price Gregory boss called me personally and requested my participation in that winter's project as a fueler, which I had done that the previous winter, which of course I very gratefully accepted. By the time that project was complete, I was lined up to work at the Anchorage International Airport running a 70-yard belly dump called a B70 for quality asphalt and paving. As I remember correctly, we extended a runway and made it conducive for million-pound cargo jets, the big heavies. And it took me a long time to get used to the smell of burning rubber due to 18-wheeled cargo jets landing, many coming in directly over top our heads. That job lasted a good 3+ months, taking up the biggest part of 2010 summer. 2013, the slab was poured for the Alaska house, small, 20 wide by 28 long, plus a 14 wide garage, but not much for a floor plan. When I met a super awesome guy from Montana, and we got together, and I originally thought I'd have him dry it in and then I'd finish it on my time off. In reality, we set coffee shop and a floor plan fit, and once we started, he took it all the way through to finish. I did the wiring and hired a plumber, ordered the cabinets from the store, hired Wendy's brother to drywall and paint. Wendy picked out the colors. I didn't have a woman in my life, so yeah, it was pretty simple to just let her do that. I moved in April of 2014 with a small amount of help from the neighbor who wanted to buy the reefer trailer. And those kids, I dearly love them. The parents were interesting. I'll just stop there. Somewhere also in this time frame, the next door neighbor offered to sell his 10 acres, cabin, well, septic, and to me instead of listing it, which I was able to accommodate, ending up with a total of 3 lots connected and becoming a very good savings account for me. I ended up selling the 2 additional lots in 3 separate sales and investing it in the truck, trailer, Ohio property, and shop. Looking back, I can clearly see Papa's eyes twinkling as he said, "Hold my beer and watch this." Now, if beer and Papa and God do not add up to you, replace the beer with Coke or coffee. Coffee is well inside of the Mennonite world. Because I never saw even the first particle of Ohio coming. I believe it was his plan all along. 2014, late summer, I'll not disclose the details, but there was a couple and a small daughter, supposedly a disabled Marine, that needed a place to live at the same time as winter was swiftly approaching, and being in Oklahoma, they thought they needed to be closer to his parents due to physical, mental situations. So they moved in with me in August 2014, and it worked out kind of nice in my thoughts because I kind of needed somebody to be in the house over winter, being gone for several weeks at a time. Sub-zero temperatures and whatnot. In a nutshell, it did not work out well at all, even though it lasted 2 years and 7 months. I was able to move on with minimal consequences and hopefully major lessons learned. The house was immediately rented out to the State Department of Transportation overlooking the Sterling Highway project as an office headquarters through Alaska First Realty Property and Property Management, being very beneficial to all involved for the duration of that project, while I lived in the cabin that I had finished as nasty things came to light and went south earlier, which was also connected to the house water and septic. That project over, it was quickly rented out to a young man from Alaska, whom Alaska First knew fairly well, with a good reputation, and it's still rented to him, getting fairly light usage. Though the girlfriends may occasionally show up and stay for a while, I don't feel like I have anything to worry about whatsoever. As Christmas of 2017 approached, previously what I said, I had moved to Ohio. I'm still not there, even though I said I was. As Christmas 2017 approached, the projects at Pump One that I had been working with for nearly 7 years through Houston Construction for Alaska Pipeline was going to be over, and it looked like 2018 was going to be a very slow work summer. So the word I heard was hang on to your pennies and don't make big bills. Like I said, I didn't see it coming in anyway, but subconsciously I was feeling or smelling too much of what I will call religiosity in the Sunday meetings. Too much dependence on the meetings themselves, maybe, and it did not bring back any memories that were good. New Year's 2018, I ended up in Ohio. Carol and I took a nice little trip together down to Georgia and Myrtle Beach, and so about 1,700 miles, taking in the Ark and a cave of some kind. And shortly after I got back to Ohio, I needed to go back to Alaska to close on the sale of the first piece of property I sold. And while there, I ended up selling the 20-acre piece too, which previous summer, and I had a interesting scenario there to get electricity to it. Would have costed just as much or more than the property itself. Anyway, upon returning to America, I did so through Idaho, then Arkansas, helping Brad build a roof over his camper, then riding as a passenger only with him for a week in his truck, pulling hopper bottom. We ended up in Buffalo, New York, and took in the Niagara Falls together. Wednesday of that week, I had started looking at truck ads, thinking I might buy one with the property sale funds instead of jumping into someone else's truck just as a driver. I might as well do it for myself. I might have looked at 3 or 4 when I got a call from North Carolina about one of them, which he told me all about. But by the time he was nearly done, I was not interested in it. Then he proceeded to tell me about another truck that he had for sale and that someone was going to get a very nice little truck with a fairly recent overhaul. And that comment is what really caught my attention. So Brad and I spent that weekend with Carol's, and when he left, I also left with Carol's car to go to North Carolina and see this truck. And here it comes. Interesting. Let me bring back a memory about the golden nugget I'm going to find. As I got close to the address, following Google Maps on my phone, Google Maps announced, in 1.5 miles, turn right onto Gold Mine Road, which I did. And immediately it announced, in 3/4 of a mile, turn right onto Nugget Lane. It was at the end of Nugget Lane where the truck lived, and I ended up putting over 500,000 miles on. Thus, I found my big gold nugget. And it was very interesting looking at that truck. I won't go into the details here, but the guy I bought it from, his name is Dave also, and he comes out of Jehovah's Witness system. And it's been a pleasure to get to know that man and give him his space to live his journey like he needs to, and I need to give him space. Yeah, I probably torqued him off or disappointed him a few times. He's torqued me off and disappointed me a few times too, but we end up talking about it, and it's pretty cool. He also found my trailer the next day, and we took care of everything. And oh my, other comments. I have concluded that Jesus, God, and the Holy Spirit are just as trustable as the Bible says they are, and that religions of man's concoction is a bunch of nonsense. Nothing but burdens that men heap on the backs of other men, and especially take advantage of and restrict women. And I don't want nothing to do with any of them whatsoever. If Papa and the Holy Spirit live inside of me, what more do I need? I've got the best therapist that there ever could be. Sometimes more is needed for a time. I'm not going to differ. I'm not going to give my ideas on that. So many dreams have been fulfilled in so many ways. Even I have a difficult time wrapping my head around it all to this day. And a comment that Dave, that I bought that first truck from, he made about me, it just warms my heart in our friendship. He says, yeah, DJ and I, we went to different schools together. He comes from Vermont. He taught me how to drive truck on the East Coast, the worst possible place you could pick in the entire United States. And frustrations, yes. I'm very glad not to go into New York anymore, but another dream that's been fulfilled that I would have never dreamt actually fulfilling is a powered paraglider. I know how to fly. And back to when I left Idaho, when I was in Washington at Charlie's place, I think it was then that I saw a plaque on the dresser that said, and I hope I don't butcher this, when you have walked to the edge of all the light you have ever known and take the next step into the darkness of the unknown, you must believe that one of two things will happen. Either you will find something solid to stand on, or you will be taught to fly. And for me personally, I feel very strongly that both of those things have happened. I've got something so solid to stand on, and I have literally been taught to fly. Another interesting thing, I got a few more notes here, if I can take a little more time. Donovan and Daryl and Donovan, my two middle boys, life's not over. I was 42. Brad was 16 when he realized he wanted out of it. And I just don't know where to go with it all, but life's not over. I remember going to Daryl's wedding. That's the last time I set foot into a Mennonite church. And I actually had it on a recorder. I recorded that service, and I had it for numerous years. And I listened to it to make sure I heard right. But I heard the preacher say, from this day forward, Daryl is responsible for Crystal's salvation, and Crystal is responsible for Daryl's salvation. And figuratively speaking, and my verbiage, my language, I had about all I could do to stay in my seat and not jump up and yell, "You lie," and ... So anti-scripture. I could not believe it. And, when I went to Daryl's wedding, I got the strong impression. I don't know that I'm going to call it the voice, but I got a very strong impression that this is the last time you're going to be going to Arkansas to visit your family. And I remember, if I could give you a verbal picture of the expression on my face, I said, "What? That's my family. They're my sons. They're my boys." But I looked at the end of that little sentence, and it was as though I could see a period. Well, you don't need to cross the bridge till you get to it. And I've often wanted to share this with my boy, because a year and a half or so, I don't know exactly how long it was later, Donovan was going to get married. And in my mind and heart, I said, well, my boy's getting married. I'm going to go to Arkansas. What am I going to do with this period at the end of that sentence? So I got my language again. I got my magnifying glass out, and I brought that sentence into focus again. And I asked Papa, has it grown a tail? Has that period grown a tail? Is it a comma? Should I go to the wedding? It's not that I don't support my son. It's not at all that I don't support my son getting married. That's his choice. Who is his choice? And I looked, I scrutinized, I magnified that sentence in real close, and I begged and I prayed and I thought and I what? And I could not detect that it had grown a tail and become a comma. I felt like it was still a period. So I stayed away. I did not even go to Donovan and Joanna's wedding, which was a pretty big shocker, I believe, to the community. Another comment I have here is man's organization versus God's organism. There's a major difference there. And the unworthy, the worthless feelings, even the happy times back then, you squelch them with the hubbub. You squelch them with the activity. And then there was two rumors. No, I don't know if I could call them rumors, but as I heard them, they were rumors, and it made big questions in my mind. One of them was the highest number of people per capita on depression medication, Mennonite women. And I said, how in the world? What in the world? I don't remember when I heard that, but it seems to me like it was quite a while before I left. Another question I always had that I'd heard about was the young people, when they leave in central Kansas, the law enforcement's worst possible nightmare was an ex-Holdeman youth. And I've concluded that listening to some of the other podcasts, they have been told what to do. They've been guided so tightly that they don't have a structure when they leave. There is no structure there whatsoever. And you are taught from conception, birth on, that the approval of your peers, and they get shunned. I can easily see where they go completely off the deep end. What won't a person do in that situation to gain the approval of your friends, of your acquaintances, of your peers? Another one I heard just very recently, which just makes perfect sense to me. Truth does not require your participation in order to exist. Bullshit does. I don't know if I should say that, but it fits. I'm sorry, it fits. And I don't know, Amanda, I kind of think one more comment I could make, or two. In this podcast, I have no desire to diss anyone. I want that clear. Mennonitism, CGCM, the Holdeman Mennonite Church is the one I came out of personally. And I do not want to diss anyone unless you are disillusioned. In that case, yes, I would love to be a part of dissing your illusions that are not right, not real. If an illusion needs to be dissed, I want to be a part of that. I'd love it. But I want nothing to be personal. And, you can take like the Israelites journeyed out of Egypt. They walked over the Red Sea on dry ground. You can read the account in the Bible. You can also read the rest of that account. It took them how long? Hours to get out of Egypt? But then it took 40 years to get the Egypt out of the Israelites. And I have found that to be very, very much. I've been out since 2005. It's coming on 19 years, almost 20 years. And I find that Mennonite filter, or the Mennonite glasses, without even thinking about it, those glasses are in front of my eyes. The judgmentalness that I am tempted to judge others. I don't even want to put any examples out there. I love the verse, all things are lawful. There should not be any right or wrong. All things are lawful, yet not all things are expedient. Leave the right and wrong out of it. Choose those things that are expedient and leave those that are not. I have liked that very much throughout my journey. And another little comment that I could leave and let your minds think about, dissect. A newborn baby is loved absolutely the maximum when it is newborn. Even with all the crying, with all the belly aches, with all the attention, with cleaning the diapers, with everything, a newborn baby is loved the very most. Yet that newborn baby has not been able to do one thing to earn that love. And I feel that I have been that newborn baby when that voice was speaking to me. And Papa has been so kind to me. He has been so gracious to me. He has let me know in untold ways how much I am loved. The story I have just shared with you folks, whoever you are, doesn't even really scratch the surface, because it's not something I can take out of my pocket and show you. It's like having lived in the Mennonite world. I was told that the fruit was good. Come and taste. Yes, come and taste. It's good. And it was plastic fruit, by the way. And I helped myself to those bananas and those apples and those oranges and those grapefruits. And I chewed on them and I chewed on them and I chewed on them. And I told myself, these are good. These are good. These are good. I'm told they're good and you need to make it your own. I chewed on them and I chewed on them and I chewed on them. Somewhere along the journey, Papa gave me a taste of a real apple, a real orange, a real grape from the promised land. And I don't know how to tell you, but I feel like it would be utterly brain dead to go back. And how can you, once you taste the real fruit, go back to plastic fruit? And yet, how can you explain real fruit to somebody that really thinks plastic fruit is good? It's like sitting on the couch beside somebody that is completely blind and holding up the paper or holding up the book and pointing word for word. This is what it says. Can't you see it? Well, how are they supposed to see it? They're blind. Sometimes you see something and you cannot unsee it. Sometimes you taste something and you cannot untaste it. You can't go back to the fake stuff. And I feel like Papa has been absolutely so above and beyond that austere master that I used to see him as. I just shake my head in disbelief. Obviously, all I knew how to be was a good Mennonite. A song by Jason Gray. One of the lines in that song, I just love it. All religion ever made of me was a sinner with a stone tied to my feet. It never set me free. There's another one, I can't say by who, but there's another song that touched Charlie's heart, and it is Into the Wild. Into the Wild. Letting go. When I let go, I'm halfway home. And I can't think of the author to that song, but that's another kind of one of my favorite. There's so many of the songs that in the Christian hymnal that I look back on and say, what in the world That don't fit at all. Oh my goodness, no. And then they have the dare to be a Daniel. Oh boy, you dare to be a Daniel, you'll find yourself thrown out on your left ear. I have often wondered what would happen if Jesus physically appeared and walked up the aisle, sat on the front bench, maybe not even got on the rostrum, and liberties given for the congregation to have thoughts. And this total stranger, never been baptized into the Mennonite regime, would get up and share some thoughts. I tend to think that he would be taken and thrown out by his left ear. Maybe some on his left ear and some on his right ear. The closed pulpit. My heart hurts. I wished I could show them, but I can't. You got to come and taste. You've got to taste. And it's not my job to be the missionary. That job is taken on to Jesus' shoulders. He's taken it to himself. He's out there seeking those that are on the cold mountains. He didn't give me that job. The job he gave me is to be what he created me to be. And when that testimony comes in by my fellow man, yes, that's a treasure, but I do not live for that anymore. Yes, it feels good, but it's not what my goal is to get those. And in my trucking career, since I've come down here and live in Ohio and over 500,000 miles, at the drop points, at the pick points, I have so tremendously enjoyed, out of the blue, a conversation will pop up, and it's a brother from another mother. All the way around. They are living their journey. I'm living my journey. And the Spirit recognizes the Spirit. That is such a heartwarming experience, and it happens so frequently. I tell you what, that's part of the trucking that I just absolutely love. And then the outfit that I got connected with a little over 3 years ago here in Ohio. What really started that journey is when I pulled into the office. The sign in the ditch between the road and the office said, "Do what's right, not just what's easy." And it's been that way from day one. And I don't see any reason why it won't continue. I love it. He loves it. They love it. And what more can I say, Papa? Thank you, thank you, thank you, Papa. The books that I've read, I don't know. I guess we can cut it out if we don't want it. The Shack. The Shack was probably number one. Influenced my perspective, my heart, my journey. Number one. And when you get a hold of The Shack and read that by Paul Young or Wayne Jacobson, it'll lead you to numerous other books by Wayne Jacobson also. And there's one that is another one that's very, very interesting and perspective changing to me. And the title of it's kind of interesting. So you don't want to go to church anymore. That is a jewel. Another one is He Loves Me. That's by Wayne Jacobson. In Season by Wayne Jacobson. Finding Church by Wayne Jacobson. I left the one I was affiliated with, jumped into kind of another one, and I left that one. And I have found that Papa's church, Jesus Christ's church, the one he's building, is very much alive and well. It's out there. And there's one fold, one shepherd, Jesus Christ is the shepherd, and he is the one that knows everything. You can't hide from him. Don't even try. Don't waste your time. The Chronicles of Narnia have also been a tremendous help to me. Either read them or audibles. The last book, which is the last battle, I believe it's in the second to the last chapter of that book. That chapter has meant an awful lot to me in that. It completely takes away the ability for man to judge man, and in a way that my feeble mind could comprehend it, and yet I can't comprehend it, and I can't explain it, so I'm not going to even try. Muscle atrophy. What is atrophy? Remember thy Creator in the days of thy youth. The older someone gets, the older I get. You don't use it, you lose it. And on a spiritual basis, there is hope until we're gone, until we're on our way back to dust. But atrophy, and how convenient it was for me to feel. I've been asked, do you remember the days when you were a Mennonite? Did you feel blessed back then? Oh, absolutely. How convenient it is to feel like you were born into the one true church of God on this earth. Therefore, the open-minded thinking, outside the box thinking, the open mind gets closed up. The box is closed up and we are inside, and our whole world is inside that box. We turn the light on and the walls of that box are gold-plated. It looks so nice. And there is a certain protection inside of a cardboard box. Cardboard is used for shipping things. It's used to contain things. And I feel like it is one of Satan's biggest tactics to keep people ignorant, naive. We don't go to any more than 8th grade education. Don't question things, just believe it. To keep them shut up in a box, he gives us a little bit of his gold paint to put on the inside walls of that cardboard box. The church, as I see it, that's a small c. The Church of the God in Christ Mennonite, a small c, as I see it, is very much an idol. The saying, truth does not mind being questioned, in conjunction with a quote from the shack. But a lie absolutely will not tolerate being questioned, being challenged. Another little quote from the shack that I just dearly love, which, no, I don't really like it because I don't like uncertainty. I like something that is laid out. It's very easy to follow a rule. That's the way I grew up. But Jesus, Papa, and the Holy Spirit do their best work on the ground of uncertainty. When I think about that, I like it. I don't have it figured out for you. And I make mistakes too. And I've got my hands full with me, myself, and I. God forbid that I judge another person. That's up to him. It's been an adventure. Perplexing, very perplexing at times, but it's been a ride of a lifetime. And I hope that I don't get to the end and have such a well-preserved body. I aim to live life to the fullest. He's brought so many dreams true for me, and it wants to crack me up how many of those dreams I knocked on their doors pretty hard up in Alaska, but not one of them. Well, yeah, lots of them came true up there too. But I knocked on so many dreams in Alaska that the door didn't open until I got here to Ohio. One of the worst nightmares, and nightmare's a dream, isn't it? One of my worst nightmares that I could ever think of when I was in Alaska was, and I told my friends, I hope, honest to goodness, God never asked me to drive a truck in the lower 48 in civilization. Oh my goodness, that would be the worst nightmare I could come up with. I can see him with a twinkle in his eye, hold my beer and watch this. My little boy don't have a clue of what's coming. And I've given myself to that, and I have had more fun than a barrel full of monkeys one at a time. I get to tour, me, myself, and I get to tour his creation together. And you want to hear a little quip? I've had Papa play a prank on me in my own truck. I have given him so many belly laughs, leg slapping belly laughs. Just like Dave used to tell me, he couldn't get rid of me because my entertainment level's too high. You think of your little boy, your little girl, out in the middle of the living room floor or out in the sandbox, and they're playing, and you're just sitting there watching them. You see their little antics. You see their little mannerisms. And it brings joy to Papa's heart, joy to Daddy and Mama's heart. You love that little child. You know what? I am utterly convinced that my Papa is out in the sandbox playing trucks with me. He's riding with me every day. He doesn't need a seat to sit on. He don't need a bed to sleep on. He don't eat any of the food that's in the freezer that I cook. He don't need that. But he is loving his little boy as we tour his creation together. And I cannot tell you how much I love him. I cannot tell you how much I love him. It is above and beyond. And I think it's the end. I think my heart is happy.
Okay. Well, thank you so much, David, for sharing your story with us. Really appreciate it. And we'll talk again.
I'd love to. I will look forward to it.
Thank you for listening. It is an honor to connect with our guests, and we wish the best for them as well as our listeners. Remember to like and subscribe for more episodes. Our People can be found on all major podcast platforms as well as YouTube. If you are interested in sharing your story, please contact us at ourpeoplepodcastteam@gmail.com. Thank you.